to write this book down. I would like you to read it. I would say it's probably one of the most important books that I've read in my life. And I'd like to think I've read quite a few. I would ask you, political students here. Any political students? Quite a few. Quite a few. So you've studied, I guess, Rousseau and Locke and Kant. A lot of philosophers. How many of you studied Charles Mills? One at the back. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. Charles Mills wrote this book called The Racial Contract. He was inspired to write this book by a woman by the name of Carol Pattersman. She wrote a book called The Sexual Contract. And in her book, The Sexual Contract, she plots the last 1,000 years and more in which the way that society has been governed has been orchestrated by men. Men have made the rules, men have made the laws. Surprise, surprise. Who do the laws benefit most? Even in the most sacred books, from most of the religions, they've been written by men. And how was it portrayed? Women. As subordinate. Often as she-devils. At the very least, inferior to men. And she plots that throughout the laws, throughout the history books. And so what Mills did, quite brilliantly, he said, I'm going to do something likewise and have a look at race. And what did he find out? What did this philosopher find out? Well, his opening lines speak volumes and are pretty shocking, as the sister said. Introduction to this book. White supremacy is the unnamed political system that has made the modern world what it is today. You won't find it in the history books. He said, this omission is not accidental. Rather, it reflects the fact that standard textbooks and courses have, for the most part, been written and designed by white people who take their racial privilege so much for granted that they don't even know or see it as political, as a norm, as a form of domination. And then he goes on to, I guess, give detail to such a shocking statement. And he looks, of course, at slavery, domination by force, 200 years, and colonialism, the taking of people's land and saying, it's ours, it's ours. You are now subordinate. We'll take all these resources, another 200 years. And then, after people said, listen, this is wrong, we can't do this anymore. We can't enslave people, we can't take their lands. The racial contract shifted to say, you can have your lands, but we'll keep the resources. We'll keep the laws that see you as subordinate. So people say to me often, listen, Simon, get over it, man. This is years ago. Why are we paying the penalty today? Why do you keep blaming us for what happened, for what our forefathers did to you some 200, 300 years ago? Well, the social contract is such that when we are having a conversation about why we can't excel, we start blaming ourselves. We start making excuses and saying it's this and that, anything but the truth. And you know, they do the same job to women too. I heard it the other day in a discussion on the BBC. They were talking about quotas and a very, I guess, animated and well-respected woman said, "We don't want favours. We don't want quotas. We want to get there on merit," she said. She said, "It's an insult to be given a place just because I'm a woman." There, right there, in that articulation. No longer does the male have to keep the woman down. She'll do it to herself. She will tell other women, it's a level playing field. All we have to do is believe in ourselves. And we know it isn't.
At that point,
let me just finish, please. Let me just finish, because I want to fast forward. For time. Because I want to prove it. I want to prove that it still isn't a level playing field. I want to prove to you that there's still dynamics that perpetuate this social contract in which we've got to be alive to. Just a few years ago, the government wanted to test the thesis that companies, the big multinationals, were discriminating against black people. So they sent out 16,000 applications. Some with an Asian name, some with an African name, and a third with English names. So all you see is the same application with the same grades, but from 3 different sounding peoples. Now you know what happened. You know what happened. It took 16 more attempts for the Asian name and the African name to be called up for an interview. Look, Asian name, here's your application, in the bin. African name, here's your application, in the bin. Could you imagine if they had my name, Simon Wolley? I might get an interview. What happens when they see me? I'm in trouble, aren't I? You spoke about education. You're 100% right. It astonished me that Michael Gove, of all people, said yesterday, "I'm dismayed that teachers are downgrading black children with a, what did he call it? He said it's a low expectation and low-level bigotry." So once again, our children are writing exams and teachers' low expectation and low-level bigotry are marking us down. And you said before, you know where this leads to? Low marks, some being thrown out of school, some being stopped in search. It's a spiral in which people then say, well, look at these people, look at these black people. It is their own will that's sending them to prisons. And bearing in mind now, the prisons are busting full, not only of black men, but of black women too. Our mental institutions are busting to the seams because, you know, this level of inequality drives you crazy. It drives you mad, you know. It's difficult to control the level of injustice, persistent injustice. Now, I don't want you to get angry. I want you to be smart. I want you to understand that this is the playing field. What are we going to do? How are we going to get past these barriers? How are we going to succeed against the odds? This is where we've got to be smart. This is where you, as students with the luxury of learning, the luxury of coming together, the luxury of organizing, have got to be at the forefront of change. Don't just think of yourself. Think of others. And when us as a group excel, you will excel too.